Very good afternoon, members. I welcome you all to today's CISCO program on two topics. One is law of evidence and burden of proof, and the second one is representations and pleadings in the face of faceless proceedings. We have two eminent speakers, CA TV Muthu Abirami, an advocate from Chennai, and CA Dr. Rakesh Gupta, an advocate and ex-member of ITAT from New Delhi. We, on behalf of Tax Bar Association, welcome both our distinguished speakers. And now I request our President, C.A. Ramdev Bhutra, for his welcome address. Over to C.A. Ramdev Bhutra.
Thank you, Ritesh. Good and a warm afternoon to all. After constant training, I hope all of us are safe from both pandemic and this corona and after any logging, etc. Friends, this year we are celebrating Golden Jubilee year of Tax Bar. So in this Golden Jubilee year, we have started a web series from 1st July. So far, we have completed 17 webinars on different topics with very eminent speakers. Today is the 18th one, in which very two big stalwarts have joined to deliberate on very practical aspects of pleadings and submissions. I hope it will be very interesting for all those who are appearing before authorities and also want a fair insight into works. I won't expect all of us are experts, but when experts are with us, we should always have confidence in ourselves. After this today's 18th webinar in this Golden Jubilee series, we take for 1.5 months due to this festival season and COVID, these due dates. Due dates increases, we'll start our journey after November. So 30th November again. One more pending now I would like to share with all the members. Moot court competition which was planned in March 2020 and it was almost finalized. But suddenly due to this lockdown announcement, it has been withheld. We are planning again. Our Golden Jubilee year chairman and immediate past Amrut Kota is assigned with the task of completing this along with our GC inviting co-opted member Pankaj Sanch.
There are some bandwidth issues. We are not able to hear you. We are not able to hear you. We have lost. Basically, we are not able to connect from the president for a time being. So now I'll do one thing. I would request our joint secretary.
So from January, ITAT from New Delhi. One thing I could say.
रितेश साहब का एक बार स्टॉप करके प्रोग्राम करके फोन पे बात कर दो.
I'll do one thing. I'll mute him.
You mute him.
Then I will continue because
I have just heard him.
Right.
No, you mute him, and then you will inform by phone.
Yes. So we'll do one thing. We'll proceed now. And he'll his introductory remarks he can continue later, sir. So now, yes. Okay. So now I request our GC Joint Secretary, Shri Madhusudan Bojja, to introduce our speaker, CA Muthu Abirami.
Yeah, thank you, Ritesh. President and other GC members and tax board members and faculty,
Our senior
members, and good afternoon. Muthu Abirami is a practicing advocate enrolled with the Bar Council of Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry. Completed law from the School of Excellence of Law, Chennai, and she is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. She holds a postgrad degree in law and specializes in business laws. She also holds a diploma in international taxation, awarded by the Chartered Accountants of India. Ritesh is audible? Ritesh audible?
Yes, sir. It is audible. Please continue.
She specializes in the tax litigation and tax advisory and appears before various judicial and quasi-judicial forums. She handles a variety of cases in income tax, including search and seizure. Apart from taxation, she also handles cases before NCLT. She was the chairman of the Direct Taxes Committee and Research Committee constituted by the Kanchipuram branch of SARC of ICAI for the year 2019-20. She is a guest faculty for LLM taxation in Tamil Nadu and Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Taramani. She has presented papers on technical topics in various forums like SIRC of ICAI, branches and CP study circles of SIRC of SEI, Revenue Bar Association, All India Federation of Tax Practice South Zone, Chartered Accountants of Study Circle, Association of Chartered Accountants, and CIA, Suvarna and Suvarna, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Savita Law College of Law, the Regional Training Institute of Office of the Controller and Auditor General, Southern India Institute, Chartered Accountancy Students Association. While she was a student, she served as a vice chairperson, student representative of the Southern India Chartered Accountancy Students Association, SICASA, for the year 2008 and 9. She has participated and won prizes in number of oratorial and debate competition at school, college, and SARC. She has acted as a judge for the moot court competitions and Oriental competitions conducted for students. With this, I introduce the first faculty of today's to this August gathering. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shibadsuan. Now I request our speaker, CA Muthu Abirami, to address the members. I'll just unmute it.
Introduction.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, sir. So now we will proceed. The topic for today's discussion would be burden of proof in income tax proceedings. I have very specifically taken up income tax proceedings, and even in that, I have tried to cover certain aspects concerning the burden of proof. So I will be dealing with general principles, then applicability of Indian Evidence Act for income tax proceedings, then burden of proof in income tax cases. What are the principles? Then burden of proof concerning the deemed income under section 68 to 69C, and burden of proof concerning presumptions in section 132(4)A and section 292C. In fact, Ramdev sir, when he was sending the introduction, so almost he has covered what is that that we would be looking for in an aspect concerning burden of proof. So that with that introduction, I think we can begin the subject. Burden of proof. Also, I wanted to share another thing. This burden of proof would be very much important going forward, because when it comes to deemed income, 68 to 69D, where the issues concerning deemed income is there, any addition made under the deemed income would go under 115 BBE, thereby making it taxable at a higher rate. So even in this context, the concept of burden of proof assumes even more importance. As such, if you look at the concept of burden of proof, everything right from residential status to proving an expenditure and profits and gains of business or profession, any chapter, any head we take, everything, some base is always there concerning the burden of proof. So it assumes even much more importance, more proportion and importance when it comes to the deemed income provision. And this is very specific to, it is even more specific to search and seizure proceedings. So Again, that assumes much more importance. So in this context, in this backdrop, let us begin the session for the day. So I will take you through the general principles of burden of proof, which I would take about 5-6 minutes, wherein I can deal with the general principles. I'm starting with the general principles so that it acts as an introduction, and in most parts, these general principles would be applicable even for income tax proceedings. Thereafter, we can directly navigate to burden of proof concerning income tax proceedings. So, what is the meaning of burden of proof? It is an obligation to prove the truth or falsehood of a fact or proposition. So, this proof does not mean it has to be very rigid in a mathematical sense. No, it is not that way. So it has to be the burden of proof. It is for the purpose of proving the truth or falsehood of a fact or proposition. And what is the standard or what is the degree of proof that is required? So it varies according to the proceedings. If you take a civil proceedings, it is based on preponderance of probabilities. But if you take up the criminal proceedings, the prosecution has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the accused has to be convicted, that the accused must be convicted. And what is the rules concerning burden of proof? So the thumb rule concerning burden of proof is that he who asserts must prove. If I make an assertion, I have to prove that assertion. There are certain exceptions to this, 2 exceptions to this. One is that facts which are within the knowledge of others. 1. Second exception is that if I have a presumption in my favor, a presumption in law or fact in my favor, then even though I assert, I need not prove. I can directly give an example concerning the presumption of law and burden of proof as an exception. Take the case of section 292C in income tax, where the presumption is that during the time of search, if money, bullion, of course, I will be dealing with it in depth in a few minutes from now. But if you look at the overall picture in 292C, if anything is seized at the time of search, then it is presumed that it belongs to the person from whom it is searched. So this is the presumption of law. So the revenue need not prove that the materials belong to the searched person, the person from whom it was seized. The revenue need not prove that, because there is a presumption in the favor of revenue in law. There is a presumption in law in favor of the revenue. So this is an exception. So he who asserts must prove, and 2 exceptions to this is facts which are within the knowledge of others and presumption of law or fact. For the exception that facts which are within the knowledge of others, I can give the example of cash credit. Take the case of cash credit, where it has been consistently held that source need not be proved. Okay, the logic behind this is that I will take, of course, when it comes to company and share capital, scenario is different. Let us take a simple cash credit scenario where source need not be proved is a settled position. I am taking a loan from a creditor. He is giving me loan, and I am proving the source of that loan, that this is the person. I am identifying the person. I'm trying to explain the genuineness of the transaction. I'm trying to explain the credit worthiness. I'm doing this. But if the department is going to ask me how I would prove the credit worthiness of the creditor's creditor. Take a case that creditor has taken the loan from another creditor. I'm taking a loan from Mr. X. Mr. X is taking a loan from Mr. Y, and then he's giving it to me. So how I would prove the credit worthiness of Mr. Y? That is something not within my knowledge. So facts which are within my knowledge, which are within the knowledge of others, I need not prove even though I assert that. Why go to the extent of proving the creditworthiness of Y? Even the creditworthiness of X, I can demonstrate that he has money to lend me. But how I would prove the creditworthiness to a very great extent, that is difficult, because it is a fact which is within the specific knowledge of the lender. So there is also a case on this point which I will be dealing when I handle the provisions concerning section 68. So I just wanted to give an example for the exception to the thumb rule of burden of proof, that he who asserts must prove. Moving on. So on whom does this burden of proof lies? So this term is used in 2 distinct senses. One is fixed by law. This is the burden of establishing a case. That is, this is concerning the party who would introduce the evidence, who would lead the evidence. This is the first way in which the term burden of proof is used. Second way is the duty to adduce evidence, which is very ambulatory and shifting in nature. It is unstable. It shifts from one side to other in the course of the trial. So, in this sense, in this ambulatory sense, when the word burden of proof, when it is used in an ambulatory sense, it would mean that it lies on the person who would fail if no evidence at all is given on either side. If no evidence at all is given on either side, who would fail? On this person, burden of proof lies. So this is a shifting nature of burden of proof. Another one is the fixed nature. Who has to lead the evidence? Suppose I am trying to establish my case that whatever purchases that I made is genuine, then I have to lead the evidences concerning the genuineness of purchases. So I'll have to give the documents that who is the party from whom I have purchased, what is the sales tax number of the person, what is the VAT number, what is the GST number, through banking channel the amount has been paid. So all these introductory evidences that I lead, this burden of proof is fixed in nature. So it can be used in two distinct senses. The term burden of proof can be used in two distinct senses. Then another interesting aspect is that we might have come across the term burden and onus. Quite often, burden and onus we have come across either in textbooks, in speeches, everywhere. But Supreme Court, in the case of Raghavamma versus Chenchamma, has held that burden and onus are different in nature. Burden of proof never shifts. Onus keeps shifting. So this is the distinction drawn by the Supreme Court in the case of Raghavamma versus Chenchamma, holding that onus keeps shifting, whereas when you use the term burden of proof, that means it is fixed in nature. This is another aspect. Then when is this burden of proof important? It is important in the early stages of a case, or it assumes importance when no evidence at all is led by either side. If I'm not giving any evidence, the other person is also not giving any evidence, it assumes importance. Or it assumes in the early stages where I have to lead the evidence, I have to introduce the evidence in this sense. But if the parties have joined issue, they have led evidence, and conflicting evidence can be weighed to determine which way the issue can be decided, then the concept of burden of proof is very academic in nature, as held by various courts. Then another interesting aspect on burden of proof is that burden of proof is not upon the party who denies a claim. It is not possible for the defendant to prove a negative. I may not be asked to prove a negative if a case is foisted against me. I will not be able to prove the negative. That is another important aspect. Most important and crucial aspect, which we often come across even in our day-to-day practice, is the next one, which I'm going to tell now. If a party is in possession of the best evidence, and he withholds it, then the court will draw an adverse inference against him, even though the onus of proof does not lie on him. Take a case of an unexplained expenditure under Section 69C. So, if I have all the documents to prove that the expenditure is explained, still I am not doing it. I am waiting for the department to establish its initial onus, to establish its initial burden, thereby to hold that I have incurred an expenditure. So the initial onus is that the department has to come up and say that the expenditure has been incurred. So if that is done, and after that is the initial burden. But even without that, I'm having all the documents to substantiate the source of the expenditure, but I'm not doing it. I'm keeping quiet. I'm telling, okay, the initial burden is upon the department, let him come and prove. So I'm holding the best evidence and withholding the best evidence. I am not producing it before the court. Now the court can draw an adverse inference against me and hold that the expenditure is unexplained. So whatever best evidence that I always possess in my hand, I should submit it at the earliest point of time. Next principle in burden of proof is that plaintiff cannot take advantage of the defendant's weakness. Plaintiff's case must stand or fall based on the evidences led by the plaintiff only. Based on the evidences led by plaintiff, his case must stand or fall. So this is the general principles. And if you take the provisions concerning the general principles on burden of proof, it is between section 101 to 114 of Indian Evidence Act. If you take the section relating to the applicability of Indian Evidence Act, it says that The Evidence Act is applicable for all the judicial proceedings before any court except for arbitration proceedings. So next, based on this, we move to the interesting aspect, whether provisions of Evidence Act is applicable for Income Tax Act, is applicable for the income tax proceedings or not. The Supreme Court has consistently held that the provisions of Evidence Act are not applicable to the income tax proceedings. That is to say, strict principles and provisions of the Evidence Act are not to be applied. What may not be strictly speaking evidence, but only material, can also be produced and relied upon by the assessing officer or even by the party for an income tax proceeding. The classic case would be section 143(3), where the words used are that even based on the materials gathered by the assessing officer, the assessment can be completed. The materials gathered. So not just the direct evidence that is applicable for income tax proceeding. Even circumstantial evidence is admissible. And that is why we have the theory of human probability theory holding a very strong fort in income tax proceeding. Take the case of Durga Prasad More, Mohanakala, or Sumati Daya. In all these cases, the court, even though the documents were proper, even though the explanation was presented before the assessing officer, before the revenue authority, still the court looked into the circumstances in which the transactions were made. It looked into the circumstantial evidence and then applied the human probability theory. So, strictly speaking, direct evidence may not be led by the department, but only based on the materials gathered by the assessing officer, assessment could be completed. So, Income Tax Act is wider, not only in respect of relevancy, but also in respect of the proof of material which can be taken into consideration. And income tax authorities are not bound by the rigors of technical rules of evidence, but they are not prevented from invoking the principles contained in Evidence Act whenever an occasion demands. So they are not bound by it, but if an occasion demands, they may apply the principles of Evidence Act. That was held in Supreme Court in the case of Chuharmal's case. But in any case, materials gathered in the assessment proceeding of one person is not a legal evidence in the assessment proceeding of another person. And also, the department cannot make a very pure guess and make the assessment without reference to any evidence or material at all. Department cannot say no burden of proof is, no Evidence Act is applicable to me, so I'm just making an assessment. That is not possible. He has to have some material, some base for making the assessment. This is held in the case of Dakeshwari Cotton Mills case. And at all circumstances, the principles of natural justice should not be violated. And the assessee must be permitted to meet the case as revealed by the inquiries. And evidence that are brought on record without the knowledge of the assessee and used against him without giving him an opportunity to rebut it, it offends the basic principles of natural justice. So, Evidence Act might not be strictly applicable, but natural justice principles has to be necessarily applied. So I am trying to think about it, and I'm having an issue in my mind concerning this Evidence Act and income tax proceeding. Okay, courts have consistently held that Evidence Act in its strict rigor and application is not applicable to income tax proceeding. Agreed. But if we take the provisions of Section 136 or Section 245L, Settlement Commission Proceedings, or 136, which says that the proceedings in an income tax before the income tax officer or the settlement commission for that matter is a judicial proceeding. Now, Evidence Act in its applicability section, it held that the Act applies to all judicial proceedings except for arbitration proceeding. So can we state that Evidence Act in its strict sense has to be applied even for Income Tax Act? So only direct evidence can be, the weightage can only be for direct evidence. So such interpretation, such things, such issues can be raised that way is something that I have been thinking about. That's something that I have been thinking about. It's a question mark. And it is also important to note that Section 131 of the Income Tax Act gives the powers of the Civil Code and the CPC for Civil Procedure Code for discovery, inspection, enforcing the attendance of any person and examining him on oath and compelling the production of documents, etc. So this is something that I wanted to share. And coming to the burden of proof in income tax cases. So, sir, someone has a question?
No. Please continue.
I'll proceed. Okay.
Yeah. Hanmandu sir, please don't mute yourself, sir, please. Please continue now.
Okay. So the burden of proof in income tax cases. The primary onus of proof rests on the income tax authorities to show that the income which they seek to tax is an income which is liable to be taxed under the statute. So the primary onus to show that the income is to be taxed is on the revenue. So it is for the revenue to establish that a particular receipt is an income which is liable to tax. But the burden of proof in such cases is not as heavy as in the case of a criminal proceedings. It is even less than an ordinary civil proceedings, and it can be discharged by merely showing that the assessee is in receipt of income. So it is not very heavy in the sense to hold that the revenue has to, the burden of proof is on the revenue to show that a particular receipt is an income. Then the assessment carries with itself a presumption of validity and legality. And there is no burden on the income tax authority to show by positive evidence that the accounts are unreliable. That the figure at which the assessee has chosen to give is incorrect. So he need not give a positive evidence that the accounts are unreliable or the figure that at which he assesses the tax is only correct. So if an assessing officer is making the tax component as XXX as particular amount, he need not bring positive evidence to show that this amount is correct. It is not his duty to do that, as held in a very old case, Lahore case, in the case of Gangaram Balmo Kandu. And another important feature about an assessment is that the income tax officer's finding could not be discharged unless it is altogether capricious and injudicious. So just like that, an assessment order's validity cannot be questioned or thrown away. And now I will be taking you through a series of judgments, very old judgments, but still they hold their fort even now concerning the burden of proof. So if an assessee receives certain sum of money in a particular accounting year, or take where a cash is found credited in an account, it is for the assessee to explain from where he got his money. So the burden lies on the assessee to explain to the authorities the true nature and source of this receipt. This has been held by the Supreme Court in Govindaraju Mudaliyar's case and Srilekha Banerjee's case. So the burden of proof is on the taxpayer, as he alone would be able to reveal the facts of his financial circumstances. And this Govindaraju Mudaliyar and Srilekha Banerjee's case was subsequently modified in the case of Paramasetti Sitaramamma by the Supreme Court. So in this case, the Supreme Court held that the burden of proof in an earlier two cases is upon the assessee to prove the nature and source and the character of the receipt. No doubt about it. But if there is no dispute about the disclosure, then the department would not be entitled to raise an inference that the receipt is accessible to income tax only on the ground that the assessee has failed to lead all positive evidence. So I am making an assertion that this is the source. As an assessee, I am making an assertion that this is the source. After I do this, there is no dispute about what I have disclosed to the department. Department is not coming up with any material. There is no dispute on what I have stated. But at the same time, I am not able to give clinching evidence, a positive evidence to show my veracity. In that case, you cannot hold Govindaraju Mudaliyar's case and Srilekha Banerjee's case is what the Supreme Court Paramasetti Sitaramamma, in that case, it was held that. So merely because assessee is not able to prove positive evidence, he has failed to lead all the evidence. In fact, the exact terminology uses that if the assessee has failed to lead all the evidence in support of his contention, that it is not within to taxable proceeding. So merely on that, the assessing officer cannot raise an inference that the amount is taxable in the hands of the assessee. And next principle is that initial onus is on the department to prove each item which is liable to be taxed as revenue receipt. But the extent of burden depends upon the nature of income and the circumstances in which it is made. So this is another judgment of the Allahabad High Court in Jagilal Kamalpat's case. So once an SSC gives an explanation, which in the opinion of the officer is not true, or it could not be reasonably be true, then the burden is upon the SSC to explain, to prove what he has stated is true, and the burden is on the department stands shifted altogether. So the burden on the department shifts altogether on the SSC. Once the assessing officer does not accept that, or if he is finding it unreasonable, then the ownership. So it is like I am giving an evidence with respect to the expenditure that I have made. The department has to come back with some evidence or some reasoning that my evidence is not proper. Then the burden again shifts upon the SSC to prove that what I have stated is right. Then burden of proof has its relevance when the issue is contentious before the parties. So there could be documents, there could be wide variety of evidences, but if a party is admitting a particular fact, then burden of proof loses its relevance. So this is again held by Karnataka High Court in Sangameshwara Associates case. So take a case during search proceedings. Document is perfect. All the books of accounts, any document that is being seized or that is being taken up in the course of assessment also, everything is proper. But if the assessee is going to say that some portion of it is undisclosed in nature, if he is voluntarily giving such a statement, if he is accepting the fact that there is a portion of it is undisclosed income, then burden of proof loses its relevance altogether. Then the burden of proof to show that an income is exempt is on the assessee. If I have to show that a particular receipt is exempt, then the burden of proof is on the assessee. Then to prove the genuineness of the expenditure claimed or a deduction or allowance, again it is on the assessee. And the burden to prove the claim of business loss or set-off, again it is on the assessee. And an interesting aspect is that suppose the assessee fails to prove his case. Suppose he fails to adduce satisfactory evidence. The assessee is not able to do that. Now, one cannot say that the department has to bring some contrary evidence to draw adverse inference against the assessee. That is not right. If I have failed, I have failed. So we cannot ask the revenue to bring some evidence, to lead some contrary evidence to draw an adverse inference against me, because initially itself I have not discharged. In the sense, assessee has not discharged the burden of proof. Therefore, this is another principle concerning burden of proof in income tax proceeding. Now,
can I ask one question? Can I ask one question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
You see, during this demonetization period, all the cash, the department is writing one sentence that the explanation has been considered but not found tenable. That is one sentence they give, and they have made all the additions possible.
Correct, sir.
So, will you be able to throw some light on that?
Sir, in those cases, I will have to give overwhelming evidence. I will have to say that my cash book already has such a balance. Like my past, I can compare my previous assessment year's records and say that my sales have always been like this. Or it is a particular seasonal sale. Say, for example, November and December during festival season, my sales are much more higher, and that is when I had to deposit. Or I can even come and prove that my nature of business is such that I deal with a lot of cash receipts and cash expenditure, which is again I can establish by way of previous years or past years. The best thing is that to say that in most of the cases, as I see in demonetization cases, in most of the cases, there will be an outstanding which the assessee would have received, and the debtor would say, "You take it or leave it. If you're not going to accept it now, then I'm not. You cannot ask me later at a different point of time. So if you want to take it, you can take it now." So in these cases, as a businessman, what I can do? Can I just forego the outstanding which I have? That is not possible. So these are some circumstances, again, because circumstantial evidences is not only applicable for the department, it is equally applicable for the assessee also. So I can bring in circumstances. I can in fact use the human property theory in my favor as an assessee. So based on the surrounding circumstances, I can prove that this particular cash receipt is not an undisclosed income, because the problem lies is that in 99% of the cases that I have seen in demonetization assessment, they have been made under section 68 or under 69 or unexplained investment, any of the deeming provision series only. So automatically the demand is equal to the income. Is almost 90-95% of it.
115 BBA.
115 BBE, sir.
Yeah, that is a 60% tax plus 25% surcharge plus interest. Now, all these evidences have been led, but one sentence that they are not found tenable. You see, in one case, my assessee withdrew.
Atulji, one request, sir. The question and answers sessions will be dealt separately because now the speaker flow will get disturbed.
No,
And
I am just requesting her to just
yeah,
consider
See,
these
because
cases.
administrator has to give the permission
Yeah.
to ask the questions. Please
Okay,
don't
okay.
disturb her. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about it.
No, we'll continue and we'll take a separate session. I mean, we'll have a few minutes for question and session also towards the end. Okay. So now we will straight away move on to section 68, issues and cash credit and issues and share application money, share premium and share capital. So when it comes to cash credit, the burden of proof, the initial burden of proof lies on the assessee to explain the nature and source of credit. By producing evidence in the support, the usual three ingredients: identity, by giving the name and address of the creditors, creditworthiness, and the genuineness of the transaction. So documentations like confirmation letter from the creditor, assessment details, income tax assessment details of the creditor as well as the assessee, the bank account details, and all other relevant evidence to prove the genuineness of the credit may be produced. Then the point is that the evidence which the assessee gives at this stage must be very robust. It should be very exhaustive. The quality of the evidence should be very high, so that it should be difficult for the assessing officer to rebut the evidences given by me. So the initial onus lies upon me. So I have to grab all the opportunities and provide the best evidences, everything to prove the credit, to prove the nature and source of the credit. I have to give wonderful in the sense wonderful as seen from the documentation, because I just remember that there is a case law which says that explanation prove my case through documents, my initial onus, if I can discharge through documents, then it should be difficult for the assessing officer to come out in and dispute my evidences. So, if the initial onus, when it is discharged, the burden now shifts to the assessing officer. So, for making an addition, he must rebut the evidences given by the assessee by bringing positive materials. I am giving certain materials to the department for proving my case. If the department is not agreeable to it, it has to counter it. It has to give positive evidence to show that my evidence is not proper, is not right. That is very, very important. So such evidences which are gathered by the assessing officer, it must be brought to my knowledge for rebuttal, for the assessee's knowledge for rebuttal. So the assessee can seek cross-examination of the witness and creditors. The assessee can also request the assessing officer to summon the creditor for taking evidence of the taking evidence by the assessee. So these are very important. So assessing officer gathers some material, and just like that, he cannot make an assessment. He has to say that I have found out these materials against you. What do you have to say? Or if I know that the assessing officer has certain materials, I can always tell him that you can summon the creditor. If you think that creditor is, if you think that whatever documentation that I have given is not right, you can summon the creditor. 131 provision, you have it with you, so you can summon the creditor. Then, if the assessing officer is going to rely on some statements made by some entry providers, something statement made by third parties, in those cases, I can always ask the department to give me an opportunity to cross-examine those third-party statements, those third party again who has given statement against me. So these are something that I can make use of it even at the assessment stage itself. But having said this, there are wide differences in view when it comes to natural justice provision. I will just share that now. In many cases, at assessment stage, we would lose the opportunity to take cross-examination of the evidences of a third party statements if it is used against me. Most of the cases I will keep quiet. I will not do anything about it to ask for a cross-examination. The matter would travel to higher forum. At that stage, I will ask for the cross-examination. At this point of time, there are many judgments which state that where an opportunity for cross-examination is not given, you remand the matter back to the assessing officer. So again, it is going to go through second round of litigation. So rather at the first instant itself, we may ask for a cross-examination. This is one set. There are many other judgments where the assessment is quashed because opportunity of being heard or cross-examination was not afforded. So either of it, we have both the ways. But in majority of the cases, if you take it, in most of the cases for not allowing cross-examination, the matter is usually remanded to the assessing officer for affording one more opportunity to the assessee to meet his case as revealed by the assessing officer. This is one aspect of it. Second aspect of cross-examination is that I say at assessing officer level, there is a third party statement against me. There is a third party statement based on which an assessment is being made. I am seeking for cross examination. I am seeking the assessing officer to give me an opportunity for cross examining the other third party. It is not being given. I am agitating the issue of natural justice before the higher forums. Now, there are cases which state that you need not be given the opportunity to cross examine because you are not prejudiced by the statement of the third party. So, in cases where the third party statement is not prejudicing me, it won't be affecting me in the assessment. In those cases, simply because you're not given an opportunity of cross examination, the case will not fall. So, it is better to seek to use the tool, to use the weapon of cross-examination at the earliest point of time so that you can gather more materials. You can try to rebut the statements given by the third party. In that way, we always strengthen our case at the lower level so that when it travels to the higher forum, it becomes very easy for the assessee to prove his case. So, again, next case is Hastimal's case where there are very many judgments apart from Hastimal also which holds that the assessee cannot be asked to prove the source of the credit. I mean, need not prove the source of the source. He can be asked to prove the source of his credit, not the source of source. That is one principle. And next, another important principle is laid down in Orissa Corporation's Supreme Court judgment where merely because summons are not served upon the creditors, addition under section 68 cannot be made. So, except for issuing notices under 131, the assessing officer did not pursue the matter further at all. So, in this case, addition was deleted by the Supreme Court in Orissa Corporation case. So, these are some cases which we can use concerning the burden of proof in 68. Now, coming to the next aspect on explanation filed by the assessee. So, the case which I was referring is Ravinder Pal Singh, Punjab and Haryana High Court, which held that explanation file should be based on evidences, not just fantastic or fanciful. So, it should be based on evidences. And I guess another most important principle is that when I am offering a reasonable explanation, when a plausible explanation is furnished, it cannot be rejected by the assessing officer very light-heartedly without any inquiry. I cannot just like that say, I'm not accepting any of the documents given by you, I'm making an addition. The assessing officer cannot do like that. I am providing evidence, he has to bring out some positive material, some rationale for why he is not accepting my evidence. He cannot simply say that whatever you say, I'm not accepting. Make an addition. That is not possible. This has been again consistently held by very many courts. So the opinion which is given by the assessing officer should be formed objectively with reference to the material available on record. That is very important. So what is the material which he has? How he is framing the assessment? That is very important. Even if at the assessing officer's level, if at the assessment stage, if you are not able to prove the case, at higher forum, it becomes very easy if we can state that the officer has not brought out any material to but my evidences. So this way, it becomes very easy for the assessee to travel at a higher forum when the assessing officer has not given proper appreciation of the evidences provided by us. Now, I am moving on to very, very interesting aspect in section 68, books of account and section 68. So the thumb rule is that section 68 can be invoked only if the books of accounts are maintained by the assessee. So the existence of books of account is a condition precedent for invoking section 68. So the AO must be satisfied that books of accounts are maintained by the assessee and the cash credit is recorded in the books of accounts. But books means books of the assessee, not books of any third party. Based on the books of the firm, addition cannot be made in the hands of the partner or based on the books of the partner, addition cannot be made in the hands of the partnership firm. So books means books of the assessee and not any third party. Now, having said this, there is an judgment of the Bombay High Court in Arun Kumar Muchala's case, where it was held that it is incumbent upon the assessee, every assessee who is doing business, to maintain proper books of accounts, and it may be in any form. If the assessee has not done so, the assessee cannot take advantage of his own wrong. Therefore, addition under section 68 was sustained even though the assessee did not maintain any books of accounts. The court held that you are bound to maintain books of accounts. If you have not done that, you cannot take advantage of the fact that you have not maintained books of accounts. I am making an addition under section 68. This was decided in Bombay High Court. But the issue here is that, is it mandatory to maintain books of accounts? Definitely it is not mandatory to maintain books of accounts for all assessees. And even in a case where books of accounts are mandatory, and if I have not maintained books of accounts, penalty can be levied for non-maintenance of books of accounts, not for making an addition under section 68. So if I'm not maintaining books of accounts, whatever is the penalty, that should be the way forward. Only that can be done. A penalty for non-maintenance of books of accounts. But that cannot be, non-maintenance of books of account cannot be used to take the case under the fold of section 68, because section 68 is very clear. The books of accounts must be there when it comes to section 68. But having said this, it is important to note that it is different in a case where the assessee accepts that he is maintaining books of accounts, but he has not produced the books of accounts. I am stating that I am accepting that I maintain books of accounts, but I need some time to produce books of accounts. Until the last minute, I am not producing the books of accounts at all. In these cases, additions are sustainable. Take a case of Sudhir Kumar Sharma. It is a Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment where the assessee was constantly holding that he is maintaining books of accounts, but he has never submitted that. So based on this, addition under section 68 was made. But interestingly, Bombay High Court in Arun Kumar Muchala's case refers to this case for making an addition under section 68. See, there is a difference in Arun Kumar Muchala's case and Sudhir Kumar's case, Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment. In Punjab and Haryana case, the assessee maintained that he is maintaining books of account, but he has not submitted that. But in the Bombay High Court judgment, the assessee he never maintained the books of accounts. But the court refers to the judgment of Sudhir Kumar's case, the Punjab and Haryana High Court case, and holds that addition under section 68 is sustainable. In fact, in Arun Kumar's case, the court held that the assessee is taking the plea of non-maintenance of books of account for the first time. So in all the previous occasions, he sought permission for preparing books. See, that is the difference. All along, he has been seeking permission for preparing books of accounts. That means he has never maintained books of accounts. He is seeking time to prepare books of accounts. He has never maintained books of accounts. And for the first time, he is taking a plea before the High Court that I have not maintained books of accounts, so no addition under section 68 is possible. So this has been done by the the important feature of the Bombay High Court judgment. So seeking time for preparation of books of accounts and non-production of books of accounts are entirely different. So these two aspects are entirely different. Now, I wanted to say this. If you take the case of, excuse me. If you take the case of Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment and Bombay High Court judgment, both are entirely different. So it cannot be done. And another important feature that I wanted to explain is that non-maintenance of books of account, this plea was taken before the High Court for the first time. Now the court held that you are taking this plea for the first time and I am rejecting it. And all along you have sought time for preparing books of accounts. Now I would like to state this. A legal ground can be raised at any stage of the case. This has been consistently held by the Supreme Court, and legal ground can be taken at any stage of the proceeding. So again, this was not considered by the Honorable Bombay High Court by humble submission. It's my humble submission. So this is one aspect of it. Second is there is another interesting case of Delhi. It's a Delhi High Court judgment where it was held that cash credits which are recorded in the rough cash book of the assessee, and if there is no proper explanation, addition under section 68 is sustainable. So books are rejected in its entirety So when the books are rejected in its entirety, assessing officer cannot rely upon any entry in those books of accounts for making an addition. So if I'm making, if I'm not relying, if I'm rejecting the books of accounts in its entirety, the assessing officer is rejecting the books in its entirety. But at the same time, he cannot rely upon any entry in the books of accounts for making an addition under Section 68. This is held by the case of Dulla Ram and the labor contractor Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment. But the Supreme Court in Khail Khan Muhammad Hanif's case held that the issue whether it would amount to double taxation if estimation of income is based and also addition under Section 68 is based. So whether there is double taxation. On one hand, I am rejecting the books of accounts and I am making an estimate. On the other hand, based on the books of accounts, I am making an addition under Section 68. So I am rejecting the books and also I am using the very same book for making an addition under 68. One I am estimating, one I am making an addition under Section 68. Whether this is possible, whether it would amount to double taxation was an issue before the Supreme Court, and the court held that it is possible. There is no double taxation. It is possible. There is no double taxation when estimate is made on the disclosed source of the business. But Section 68 addition is made on the undisclosed source of income. That is the distinction. Estimation is made on the disclosed source. I'm rejecting the book and it is on the disclosed source. Whereas Section 68 is an undisclosed source. This was held by the Supreme Court. But however, subsequently in Devi Prasad, Vishwanath Prasad's case, the Supreme Court held that in a given case, whether in a given case the income tax officer may tax the cash credit entered in the books of accounts of the business and at the same time estimate the profit must depends upon the facts of each case. It has qualified that holding that it depends on the facts of each case. So this is quite interesting when it comes to Section 68 because usually we find that books are rejected, an estimate is made. In addition to that, Section 68 is also made. So this is a frequent feature which we see. We can always take the help of Dulla Ram contractors, Punjab and Haryana High Court to say that is not possible. Once you reject the books of accounts and make an estimation, no addition under Section 68 can be made. So I am trying to bring issue over here. I'm trying to I am seeing certain issues here. So can there be a part rejection of books only for the purpose of estimation of income? Can there be a part rejection of books only for the purpose of estimation of income? Whether the information in the books vanishes into thin air merely because they are rejected. Take a case where cash loan is shown in the books. I am rejecting the book. Does it mean that I cannot invoke Section 269 SS? So whether it vanishes in the thin air merely because books are rejected? This is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that when books are rejected, from where will the assessing officer consider the cash credit? Can it mean that the books are deemed to be no longer in existence and there is no question of explaining the credit from such rejected books? One portion of it. Next portion of it is that one of the purposes of books of accounts is for computing the income. If books are rejected, it means assessing officer does not believe in the entries in the books and the income computed by the assessee. And he states that the books are wrong. Then again, how the assessing officer can rely on the same books of account that was rejected and ask the assessee to explain an entry? Can the assessing officer approbate and reprobate at the same time by accepting what suits him and rejecting what does not suit him? So should not the rejection be holistic? So once he rejects, rejected. Only an estimation can be made. No addition under Section 68. So these are some arguments which I thought that can be built upon both the sides of the story to hold whether rejection of the books as well as addition under Section 68. That is estimation as well as addition under Section 68. Whether it is possible. This is something that I have thought about. Then coming to the capacity of the lender, the assessee must prove the capacity of the creditors to advance the money. So it is the assessee's case to prove the capacity of the lender. And he is not supposed to know the capacity of the money lender or the cash creditor. It is within the exclusive domain of the creditor. So this is why we have Section 131, where the department can issue summons and try to ascertain the creditworthiness of the party. And try to find any questions? And try to find that in case of any suspicion, the department can always issue a summons under 131 to verify the transaction. This is a very important principle. So I am taking money from a money lender. How am I supposed to know what his credit worthiness is. So in this case, we can take the help of this Patna High Court judgment in Hanuman Agarwal. So all the judgments which I am discussing, it is there in my note. I will share it with the president shortly, the notes, so you can also have a reference of the case laws that we are discussing. So when the cash creditor is an income tax assessee, it cannot be said that he is not a man of the means. So this has been held by Rajasthan High Court. And again, source of source need not be proved. A very famous case of Guwahati High Court, Nemi Chand Kotari's case. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Gaurav?
Please go ahead, man. I think.
Yeah. Okay. So each entry must be explained by the assessee, and similarly, the disallowances made by Section 68 by the officer, he also has to suppose there are 5 or 6 line items of credit entry which assessing officer does not believe. He has to prove each, and I mean, he has to give the document. He has to counter for all the 5 or 6 items. He cannot just like that say, okay, overall I am just making an addition. That is not possible. So either way, every entry must be explained by the assessee, and even when the department is trying to make an addition, even it has to give its evidence and materials for all the entries. Suppose there are 2 or 3 entries, credit entries, which are proved, but the 4th and 5th entry is not proved. The department cannot make addition for all the 5 entries. So either ways, every entry must be proved. Then again, mere mention of the income tax file number of the creditor is not sufficient. So the confirmation letters are not produced. Genuineness cannot be treated to have been proved by the assessee. And the assessee cannot be asked to explain whether the credit which is in his books, whether they have suffered tax. So the department cannot ask the assessee to prove that the credit which is appearing in his books has already suffered tax. That is not possible. And again, the Guwahati High Court has held that transaction by check alone doesn't mean that the transaction is sacrosanct in nature. And when it comes to deposit from tenants, where cash credit is a deposit from the tenant, then it is not necessary for the assessee to prove the capacity of the tenant to make the deposit or advance. So the assessing officer would not be justified if he merely directs the inspector to verify the statements, and on that basis, if he is giving a report, straight away arriving at the conclusion that the transactions are not genuine. That is not proper. An opportunity has to be given to the assessee to meet the report of the inspector. And another important case is regarding cash found at the time of search. So assessee explained that the cash receipts were realization of sales effected in earlier years by the firm in which he was a partner. So previously he was a partner of a firm, and he stated this cash is pertaining to the sales already effected. And he has filed confirmation letters also. But when the summons are served, the parties either denied any relationship with the assessee, or they stated that they don't have, they denied the relationship with the assessee, or they did not respond to the notices. So the court held that the assessing officer is justified in treating the receipts as unexplained, and making an addition under Section 68 is proper. So this is a case, a Supreme Court's case in Vijay Kumar Talwar versus CIT. I think the SLP was dismissed. SLP of the assessee was dismissed in this case. And case of name lending, where name lending issues are there, the additions were sustained, where trade creditors were there, and there were no significant transaction of purchases, and the bank account of the creditors were handled and opened by the employee of the assessee, and the branch is the same bank where the assessee maintains his account. So in these cases, the court held that it is a case of name lending, and the additions were sustained. And we also have a recent judgment of the Supreme Court in Basir Ahmed Sisodia. Supreme Court decided in the month of April 2020, where in this case, the assessee was not able to give documents in support of his contention under Section 68 during the course of assessment proceedings. But he has explained everything in the course of the penalty proceedings. Now the matter of quantum was before the Supreme Court. The assessee explained the court that with respect to all the details pertaining to the Section 68 creditors and all the identity, genuineness, and creditworthiness were proved at the time of penalty proceedings, and penalty was dropped. Therefore, based on that, his quantum should also be dropped, and the court accepted it. Supreme Court accepted it. It is a very welcome judgment. Normally, what happens is we seek for the dropping of penalty based on the quantum. But here it is a reverse case and it is a welcome judgment of the Supreme Court. So these are some issues concerning Section 68 additions in general. We have a lot more to cover in terms of section share capital, Section 69 and presumption and other areas. Now I find that I'm close to an hour or so. So I will share my notes where I've made detailed notings on all the areas that I wanted to cover initially, like share capital addition on share capital in 68 and 69 series addition, and also presumptions in 132(4)A and 292C. So these are some areas that I've already covered. So I will share my notes and I'm open to take some questions for the next few minutes.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Anybody can ask questions relating to all the topics which you have left it out. You can take it up, madam.
Series or 132(4)A or 292C. I'm open to answer
Please,
that.
please. Now, friends, our very lovable person, always enjoyable person, Dr. Rakesh Gupta is here. I couldn't address in my earlier welcome address. Listening to him in ICI's appeal drafting and etc. that session, at that time, I thought of inviting him in tax bar itself. So such a beautiful presenter he is having. I find such people who can do justice to assessees come out of the tribunal immediately. At least we have some scope there. So with this brief, now I hand over to Ritesh to take further proceedings for introduction of Rakesh Gupta, sir. Over to Ritesh.
Thank you, sir. I would request our next distinguished speaker to be introduced by our GC member, Shailendra Sharma. Shailendra Sharma ji, please introduce our speaker, Dr. Rakesh Gupta. Over to Shailendra Sharma.
Okay. Good evening, friends. Hope all you are super excited this evening as I am. Excited for the amazing conversation that we are going to have right now, in addition to what we already have a little while back. It gives me immense pleasure in introducing to you our next guest speaker, Dr. Rakesh Gupta, an eminent speaker and an authority on income tax matters, especially those related to tribunals. Born on 3rd January 1963 at Pawan Bridge, Bhumi of Vrindavan, he had an exemplary academic career. After securing merit positions in high school and intermediate, he completed graduation from St. John's School, Agra in 1980 and secured first rank in the university. He is not only an FCA, not only an FCS, not only an ICWA MBA, but also an LLB first rank holder in university, an LLM and a PhD too. Any important degree of our field, you name it, he has it. Later, he was appointed as member of Income Tax Appellate Tribunal at an early age of 37. However, he resigned later on, and his first posting in ITAT was in Hyderabad only. He also co-authored 2 books with his partner Dr. Raj K. Agrawal, which were published by leading publisher Taxman, namely Search and Seizure and Assessment of Search Cases and Taxation of Real Estate Developers and Joint Development Agreements. Presently, he is practicing as an advocate and appearing in ITAT, High Courts and Supreme Court, where he argued high-profile cases of the country, drawing widespread media coverage. He also participated in United Nations Committee of Experts on International Cooperation in Tax Matters, held in UN headquarters in New York and regional head in Geneva. He is also a member of International Association of Tax Judges and participated in a meeting held in Helsinki in Finland and Cambridge in UK. He was invited to address Chamber of Commerce of Industry by Abu Dhabi and Bahrain also. So dear friends, in the next 30-40 minutes, we are going to learn how to get ourselves prepared for representation and pleading in the wake of faceless assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely delighted to present our next speaker, Dr. Rakesh Gupta. Please give a big round of applause and big thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you, Shailendra ji, for having introduced me in a very nice manner. Mr. Bhutada and other
office bearers of this Telangana and Andhra Pradesh Tax Bar Association for inviting me to be with all of you. Hyderabad as such has got a great place, or a special place in my heart, particularly in my professional career. At a young age of 37, I do vividly remember in the year 2000, I landed in Hyderabad, and though I remained there briefly for about 9 months, I joined in Hyderabad benches of the tribunal. I resigned therefrom because for me, I thought, because Mr. Bhutra has said, why, do persons like me, not stay. It's not like this, but for me, I thought that it was a very flat kind of organization because I joined there as an accountant member. And for an accountant member, the hierarchy, is somewhat flat. Therefore, I thought that I must use my whatever little knowledge and experience in the field of advocacy. So friends, the assessment has turned by and large faceless, and so has been the first appeal. But then that is not the end of the road, and that is not the end of the matter either. Many more proceedings are in the pipeline, and they are ready to become faceless. And we can say that the work is in progress. In the lighter note, if I am permitted to say that in the face of the facelessness, now there is a crisis of face saving. But then please do not ask me that this crisis is for whom. For all of you to infer. Though the methodology of representation, because of the shift from physical to facelessness, it's taken place, but then there is not much change in the mode and manner of the pleadings and representational skills, except to the that it may not be possible for us to know from face reaction or officers of the Commissioner Appeal as to what extent these authorities have appreciated and understood the points which we have conveyed as we used to do earlier. Lots of things, as has been my experience and so must be yours, used to be clear at the bar itself. In the course of hearing, it was possible to explain the evidences with respect to the inferences and pleadings. We could have correlated the inferences, pleadings with the evidences. So as to enable these authorities to appreciate in case if they at all were willing and objective to appreciate. That is a different matter. If somebody is hell-bent not to appreciate it, then nothing could have been done. But then this was my experience. Facelessness now has got some positive aspects also. And that positivity or positiveness is in the sense that there may not be any possibility of any bureaucratic ego. Which is quite fragile. Now being rubbed by us on the wrong side, which could be possible, in personal interactions, though inadvertently. That kind of the positive aspect of this facelessness is that we may not end up in rubbing that fragile ego and that too on the wrong side. Because of the lack of personal interactions with these authorities. So friends, the topic which has been so eloquently spoken by the preceding speaker, I must compliment to her. She has received several compliments in the chat box also, I have seen. Now, the topic which has been given to me, are somewhere on the borderline on which she has spoken. Pleadings and the representational skills is the topic. And since I said that there is not much shift or change or alteration in this mode and manner, except that the cost of repetition, I would say that instead of the physical now, we'll have to upload our replies. But then the basic, the fundamental, and the underlying suggestion, which has always remained at my end, is that we must be thorough in respect of our pleadings on facts. File of the assessing officer, since that is a court of original jurisdictions of the tax proceedings, must be burdened with factual pleadings, factual averments, and factual evidences in respect of each item of questions asked in accordance with law, at least before the assessment is finalized. Because any piece of evidence, any piece of factual pleading or averment which you seek to place before the assessing officer will go a long way in determining the ultimate fate and outcome of these proceedings. And then those pleadings on facts, those pleadings or evidences, factual evidences which you place before the court of original jurisdiction, and which is the basic law of pleading, you can, as a matter of right, ask the appellate authorities to take such factual pleadings and evidences into account, assess their import and impact on the final outcome of the adjudicatory proceedings. Therefore, I always say that never feel shy, and there's all the more reason in these kind of proceedings of the facelessness, whereby we must be strong in placing all factual pleadings, evidences, and averments to the file of the assessing officer. I remember, and I always quote my guru, Mr. K.C. Singhal, the ex-vice president of the tribunal, who told me in my early practice life that if you lead yourself in a situation whereby you are forced to move a petition for additional evidences, then you take it that half of the battle is lost. Your valuable energy, which could have been mobilized and utilized for effective and efficacious presentations on merit before the appellate authority, will be lost for the purpose of seeking the admission of the additional evidence. So I am not saying that the additional evidences, or the occasions will not be there when we are forced to move additional evidences, but then we should be in a position to envisage, contemplate, wait, as to what kind of factual arguments, would be required to be taken, at least before the appellate authorities. All necessary factual material to support those factual arguments should be placed before the court of original jurisdictions, that is before the court of the assessing officer. Once assessing officer has asked, now the faceless assessing officers would ask through the notices. Once he has asked, his duty is over. Now we cannot be heard saying, oh, these proceedings have lasted for 9 months thenceforward, and therefore if an assessing officer wanted to ask, then he could have reminded me. No, that is not his job. He once asked, his duty is over, his job is over, and thereafter it will be for us to support the factual pleadings and the factual averments with the factual evidences. Say that the facts are like the arguments of the, and we practicing either as a chartered accountant or as a lawyer are the master of facts, and particularly we when practicing before the tax courts or tax authorities. And the facts are like the arguments of God, and therefore I always say that one can imagine and one can visualize that how closer are we to God. Therefore, when the assessing officer, or now the faceless assessing officers, or now faceless battery of the assessing office of the various units would ask about the cash credits, as madam, my predecessor speaker, was referring about the share capital or the allegations of the accommodation entries of the credits. The onus, I mean, she referred and she said that there is a fine distinction between the onus and the burden. And onus is oscillating, onus is vacillating. The initial onus, now in respect of the credit which is appearing in books of account, is on me. And therefore, if an assessing officer has asked about the cash credit, and therefore the initial onus lying in my court, I have to hit the ball. It is like a game of ping pong. I always say, I am required to hit the ball to the court of the opponent. And I, having discharged my onus, then it will be the onus of the counterparty, that is the opponent, that is the assessing officer, to hit it back in my court. And therefore, the cash credits or the credits or those things which Madam said where the burden of proof lies on us. Now, it will be incumbent on us to lead and place before the court of original jurisdiction the necessary factual evidences, factual averments, and factual pleading and material. Because if these factual materials are not placed at this stage, and later on before the appellate authorities we seek to adduce these evidences, and then these evidences then will fall into the category of evidences, and then for the admission of the additional evidences there is a different codified law, that is under Rule 46 capital A of the income tax rules, and for the tribunal Rule 29 of the appellate tribunal rules. Therefore, one more obligation we will have to honor as a counsel or as an SSC as to what prevented us from not filing or not placing these factual evidences before the court of original jurisdiction. And therefore, we'll have to make out a case if we are appearing before the first appellate, authority as to whether this is an issue on which the assessing officer did not give us adequate opportunity and then decided this issue against us, or whether the SSC was prevented by sufficient cause from adducing this evidence when he was called upon to adduce, or even if he was not, even if he was not called upon to adduce or produce this evidence, he was still prevented from adducing. Or this assessment order itself has been passed by the assessing officer without giving adequate opportunity being heard. Now, this evidence on facts, which had you filed it before the court of original jurisdictions on or before the conclusion of the assessment proceeding, and if you had so filed it, then you could have, as a matter of right, asked the appellate authority to consider the impact and import of this evidence. Now, instead of you arguing, now, first of all, you will have to overcome that first obstacle, obstruction, hurdle, I mean, which was caused by that SSC himself. One more hurdle which the SSC has caused to himself. Now he will have to overcome it. And now, before that hurdle is overcome, now there is an entire process which you will have to undergo, because that is the mandate of law. No additional evidence can be admitted unless the other party is being heard as to its admission. And then that appellate authority will have to pass a speaking order as to whether he chooses to admit this evidence. And then, in case he so admits this evidence, then the very act of admission of this evidence by the first appellate authority, that may become the subject matter of the appeal of the revenue before the tribunal. Therefore, I always say that we must be lavish. And there is all the more reason now in the view or in the face of this facelessness of the proceedings. We must be lavish. We must not feel shy. We must be magnanimous of filing the factual pleadings, factual averments, and factual evidences. And to this extent, I say that you burden the file of the assessing officer to this extent that he is lost. I'm not saying, I mean, for any negative purpose, but then, I mean, I'm trying to drive home that point that we should not be miser in parting with the factual informations, factual evidences. You imagine, you visualize, even you visualize to this extent that maybe you are appearing in the assessment proceedings of an assessment year which relates to a period of 2 years back. But then even if there are certain developments which have taken place on or after the close of that year till the date when you are filing, that also you bring it on record in order to press and in order to prove your point. So if you are proving the purchases from a creditor, for example, I mean, the examples can be multiplied. So if you are trying to prove the factum of purchase having been made by you, and then if there are certain payments through the banking channel which you have made even after the close of that previous year, because there is always time lag between the end of the year and the period when the assessment proceeding is on. So whatever evidences you can garner, you can accumulate, you can collect in terms of even the GST returns or the GST forms with respect to that purchase. I mean, that also you must ensure to place it, because I always say that each and every evidence, howsoever small and immaterial it may appear to be, but then when it comes to the appreciations of the whole gamut of evidences put together, then for an adjudicating authority, each bit and piece of evidence, even as Adam, my predecessor speaker, said about the circumstantial evidence. Now, each the direct evidence, the documentary evidence, the circumstantial evidence, howsoever feeble that evidence may be, I mean, it has got its own role, because when, as an appellate authority, when you tend to appreciate the entire gamut of evidences, then you appreciate the impact of all the evidences put together, and then you try to ask a question to yourself as to, now, where is the balance which is tilting? Like, as is often said, in case of whether a particular profit is, whether it's a profit from the trade or is a profit from investment, in order to determine under which head of income, I mean, that profit is to be assessed. Now, there are several tests. No test is conclusive. And therefore, I mean, when the evidences in respect of all the tests put together are appreciated by the court, and then what is the first feed which comes to a person before whom the evidences are flashed? I mean, that is the touchstone, that is the, I mean, and that is the barometer, I mean, with which, and which rather, I mean, guides that adjudicatory authority to decide. So whether it is a cash credit, whether it is a commission, I have seen many times the assessing officer asks about the commission. Now we end up in establishing or bringing the evidences only to this extent which establishes the factum of payment of commission. But not only the factum of commission of payment, now must have been asked, but about its business nexus, that this expenditure has been incurred wholly and exclusively for the purpose of your business. And the evidence which establish, indicate, support and substantiate that this commission has been paid for the services rendered for the purpose of your business. Similarly, I have seen, I mean, though, I mean, of late these questions, I mean, have got, I mean, are not asked in that in very many words, but then suppose some foreign traveling expenses. So the questions which are asked usually by the tax officers are not only in respect of the factum of the expenditure concerned, but then their nexus, the wholly and exclusively nexus with your business. And therefore, unless and until you bring on the evidences to prove the nexus between this expenditure and your business, then you have got a very tough time ahead. And later on, if you want to be heard, oh, sir, this evidence, I mean, could not be placed, then obviously the first appellate authority would ask, you have come too late, this question having been coined and canvassed against you, but then at that stage, you kept this evidence close to your chest. What was the special reason for you, I mean, not to have opened up your evidences before the court of original jurisdictions, and therefore you first of all try to satisfy me as to why should I at all in the first place look at this evidence. And that is why my guru, Mr. K.C. Singhal, said that if you lead yourself to a situation whereby, I mean, you are bound to lead additional evidence, then you take it, half of the battle is lost. But then I'm not saying, I should not be misconstrued to be saying that the additional evidences, I mean, cannot be furnished. There may be genuine circumstances, there may be genuine cases in which a person finds himself that this evidence, which could not be filed for any one or more of those 4 justifications which are there under Rule 46A, or even for the 5th thing, which I always say, for the purpose of effecting substantial justice. If some evidence goes to the root of the matter and is essential for effecting substantial justice, then also the courts have said that the evidence may be admitted, but then never take a chance. Never take a chance not to file evidence, even if you are in season of that evidence at that stage, you must, because admission of additional evidence itself is a process, which to the extent possible, should be avoided in order to bring efficaciousness in your representation, and which ultimately, is going to cement your case. Because I always say, this is the foundation stage. Any cement or brick, or for that matter, that is a metaphoric expressions. Now, any evidence on facts which you place at this stage in order to build this edifice of your assessment, now is going to be conveyed, is capable of being conveyed for you till the Supreme Court. As Madam Speaker, she was referring that when the factual averment about the maintenance of books, was conveyed by the SSC for the first time before the High Court. The High Court said, "Oh, why should we hear you? This is an afterthought." I do remember. In the matter of cash credit. In the matter of cash credit, I do remember vividly. Now, I was arguing one case, and before the Delhi High Court, you must have seen in the series of cases on share capital. MAF Academy, the NR portfolio, I had been a party to them. And Justice Bhatt, as he then was, my lord, he asked, Dr. Gupta, you tell us, now these shareholders, now having invested a substantial amount in your company, now where have they disappeared in the thin air? I do remember. Since I was representing those cases before the High Court, I said, my lord, I'll explain. Kindly show me the indulgence of 2 minutes. Now, these investors were prompted by me to make investment on an implicit premise that we will do servicing of their investment. Now, because of my project having not taken off, we could not do servicing, and because of which we defaulted on the implicit promise which we held. And therefore, these investors, came around and then decided as a measure of strategy whereby I would be, should be, and ought to be in soup. And that is why they made themselves disappear so that I'm hit below the belt. And that is why today, my lords, I am before my lords. I do remember, my Lord Justice Bhatt said, Dr. Gupta, you tell us, if on facts you have made this kind of a pleading which you have made so passionately before us at any stage, not necessarily before the assessing officer, but at any stage, even before the first appellate authority, before the tribunal, then we would borrow your explanation. But then, it was never conveyed, it was never impressed upon, it was never pressed by the SSC. And therefore, the importance of putting your factual arguments at the court of original jurisdictions cannot be overemphasized. And I think, and as Madam Speaker said, my predecessor speaker, that this entire scheme of the Income Tax Act, or for that matter any act, Income Tax Act is not an exception to it, is based upon as to who has to prove what. And that is called the burden of proof. And she very nicely explains burden of proof. That burden of proof rests on a person who asserts a particular fact to be a fact, except barring 2 exceptions which she made out. Or if there are presumptions, like as she made a reference, section 292C, then in that situation, the burden of proof has to be discharged, because the burden of proof, the general principle is that whosoever is claiming the benefit of any deduction, rebate, relief, exemption, concession, the burden is on him. Whosoever wants to tax a receipt as income, the burden of proof is on him. barring the deeming fictions of section 68, 69, 69 A, B, C, D. So this aspect has to be taken care of with regard to the burden of proof, that you must burden the file of the assessing officer by discharging all burden of proof. The second thing in the presentation, which I think that I must share, though Lakshman Rekha has been drawn by Shailendra Sharma ji that 30-40 minutes are there, but then I'll try to finish it by that time. But then this was the first point which I have made. I have got many, but let me see that within this Lakshman Rekha, how many am I able to make? Now, request for the DVO appointment. Now, suppose if there is an issue of section 43C or section 50C, which is involved in your case, whereby you happen to transfer a capital asset, being land or building, or you happen to transfer a trading asset which is not a capital asset, being in the nature of land or building, for a consideration which is less than the stamp duty value. And then section 50C and section 43CA's deeming fiction is there at your face. But then you hold your ground and say that the real fair market value is lesser than the stamp duty value, and therefore the district valuation officer should be appointed. But then the requirement of the law is that you must object, and therefore when the burden under the law has been cast on his shoulders to raise objection, therefore you should not be found wanting in raising the objections during the course of assessment before the assessment officer. Because if at this stage you are found wanting and later on you want to make up your deficiency, the deficiency which has scrapped because of any latch or negligence, omission or commission, then it may be difficult for you. So this must be taken care of. Now, material with assessing officer, as Madam Speaker, my predecessor speaker, also said about some adverse material in possession of the tax officer. But then you must demand. If you don't demand, now that material, is given some reference in some questionnaire. And then you, as an SSE, do not ask for the copy of that material. Then what should be taken in the eyes of law? Perhaps that you know the content and therefore you did not demand it. You must demand it, and therefore your pleading, must include or a special request. Sir, in your questionnaire, you have referred and relied on some information or some material, depending upon the facts of your case, and kindly part with that information or the detail or the so-called evidence in your possession to me, so that the effective, efficacious, and meaningful reply can be filed by me. Now, one important pleading which Madam Speaker has also demand cross-examination, because right to cross-examination is with you, but then this right is available on demand only. Now, assessing officer having supplied you some statement of an adversarial deponent. Now you try to meet his depositions by your oral submissions or by written submissions for that matter. But then on the one hand, there is a statement on oath, and on the other hand, your bald assertions. Therefore, these bald assertions will not displace the impact and import of that statement which has been recorded on oath. You must ask for cross-examination, and when you ask for cross-examination, then it will be duty of the assessing officer, in case he has collected some evidence or some statement, because that person becomes his witness, to produce that witness for your cross-examinations. And in most of the time, then you take it, the department, is total failure. But then, irrespective of that fact, the department fails, the important impact of that adverse deposition, that is what the Supreme Court has said in Kishni Chand Chelaram, 125 ITAT 713, that evidence then will have to be excluded from consideration. But then you must demand. But if you do not demand, you try to make up this deficiency before the appellate authority, then maybe that you may have lost the bus, and maybe forever. Your representational skill, must be important, be specific from this point of view. The next representational aspect which I would highlight is that in case some evidence is not coming which is in your favor, then you can invoke the assessing officer to exercise his power of summoning under section 131. With that power, which is vested in a court while trying a suit, But not only for the purpose of one party, but then if the other party wants to invoke that kind of a power through him, then the courts have said that it is his duty, as a court, it is his duty to enforce the attendance of any witness, including an officer of banking company, and examine him on oath, or compelling him for the production of books of accounts, or for the purpose of issuing a commission, or for the purpose of discovery and inspection. I mean, those kind of powers are under section 131. Therefore, your representational skill, your pleading, I mean, take this in some parties, some suppliers, now having already been paid by you, now they are not willing to extend any cooperation to you, but then their non-cooperation, I mean, may stand and may stare against you. And therefore, you can say that those parties are not in my control, superintendence and direction. And therefore, I need your help. You kindly tell me whatever amount of diet money or any other expense I'm required to deposit. Your representational skill, I mean, must be so much specific and vivid in this respect. And you having made request, the assessing officer have not made any effort in that direction, let him not make any effort in the direction. But then the non-appearance of a witness now will not come against you, because you have bared your chest. You have made a specific requisition before the assessing officer. So this aspect needs to be clear. Any witness which you want to produce in your favor, you make a mention in your pleading. Sir, in case you want this witness to be produced, kindly let me know. Because when you are bearing chest in your pleadings to this extent and yet assessing officer choosing to sit over it, then thereafter the blame cannot be fastened at your door. Similarly, you make a mention, sir, these details which I am furnishing are well supported through my books of account. Kindly let me know. The books of accounts are available. They are amenable for inspection, for examinations before you, or now before any invisible assessing office. And kindly mind it. Now we will see as to how these faceless assessing officers would demand the production books of account. But I tell you, these books of accounts, non-production, despite the assessing officer asking, I'm talking of when the physical, I mean, presence was required. The assessing officer having asked you to produce books of account, you having not produced them for any reason, now it was liable to be viewed with utmost seriousness, even at the highest court of the land. And it was very much likely that even if you had produced those books of account, the assessing officer probably would not have even seen them. And even if may have seen them, would not have understood anything out of it. But then the very fact of you not producing books of account, having come on record, now is liable to be viewed adversely, right from the assessing officer till the state of the Supreme Court. I remember in one of the cases which came against the order of Chhattisgarh High Court, now before the Supreme Court, I remember Justice Kapadia, as he then was as Chief Justice, he asked me, and it was a case of a cash credit, and which had got nothing to do, because the issue was on the genuineness of a transaction. It was not with reference to whether the entry was there in books of account. It was on the genuineness, and the genuineness of a transactions can be proved deholds the books of account based upon the evidence of identity, capacity, the genuineness. But then the finding of the assessing officer, which remained unassailed, was that the books of accounts were required to be produced. The assessee did not ask. And you know, Justice Kapadia, he asked. Now, despite you having a somewhat moderate case in your favor, but then you kindly answer one question. Why did you not produce books of account? I said, my lord, that is beside the point. That has got nothing to do. Well, no. A recalcitrant person, a non-indulgent person, has not to be shown indulgence by this court, that too at this level. And then he threw the file. On Monday and Friday, if somebody wants to see how the files are thrown. So the non-maintenance of, non-production of books of account. Now, I mean, that kind of a finding, I mean, should not come in the assessment order. And because that is very serious. I always say, I have spoken on the factual evidences to be brought on record. I always say that legal pleadings can wait, because the legal pleadings, I mean, even if you may not have raised it before the assessing officer, they can be raised before the appellate authority. Legal pleadings, pleading relating to the jurisdiction, pleading relating to the limitation, they can wait. But I accept, of course, where the law requires you to raise those jurisdictional issues, even before the assessing officer, like if you remember, under section 292BB. Now, probably that section may not be relevant because now the notices will be served through email. But then 92BB, if we have not raised objection regarding the non-service of a notice, or before the conclusion of assessment proceeding, unless that assessment is made at 24, then you are precluded from raising that issue before the appellate court. That is what the import of section 292BB. Similarly, under section 124(3), we used to raise dispute about the territorial jurisdiction of the assessing office. And section 124, subsection 3, I mean, used to say, now to what extent it will remain relevant when now there is a seamlessness into the jurisdiction. The, I mean, 120 subsection 3 used to say that unless you raise your objection as to the territorial jurisdiction of a particular assessing officer from whom you have received notice on or before a particular time limit of 30 days, then thereafter you will be precluded from raising that objection. In the case of 148, initial notice will come from an assessing officer. 143(2) also will come a physical assessing officer. So 124(3), I mean, may be relevant. But then with the seamlessness, because 148 proceedings also will have to ultimately go to the faceless, I mean, nature, and the way, I mean, the trend is. So now in penalty, but I am taking the last point. In penalty, most of the penalties, except section 270 capital A now, or for that matter earlier 270(11)(c), except section 271(AAD), I mean that provision which has been brought by Finance Act 2020, or section 271(AAC), which was brought by Taxation Law Second Amendment Act 2016. Now all other provisions, penalty provisions, are subject to section 273 capital B, and which says that no penalty shall be imposed if the SSE satisfies the penalty imposing authority that there was a reasonable cause for the failure. Whether there was a reasonable cause for the failure is something which is essentially based on facts. And the facts, as Madam Speaker, my predecessor speaker also said, that the facts which are supposed to be within a special knowledge of a person now will have to come forward because the burden is on him. So according to section 273 capital B also, the burden is on that person because he is trying to put a reasonable cause as a defense. So, and cause is supposed to be within the personal knowledge of that. Therefore, it will be for the SSE to lead evidence. So when it will be for the SSE to lead evidence, the burden is on him. Then again, we are back to that theory that burden will have to be discharged by making factual pleadings, factual submissions, factual evidences, and then it will be for the SSE to lead evidence, not only to lead evidence, but then to substantiate. And then that cause should not only be a mere cause simpliciter, it should be the reasonable cause. Now, there is a difference between a cause and a reasonable cause. Not every cause is a reasonable cause. As the name suggests, that cause which hits the reason of a person who is hearing that cause as a reasonable cause, now is a reasonable cause. So friends, even though there is a paradigm shift in the assessment process in form, but in substance, I mean, it is almost same. Rather, I mean, you have to articulate your skills for making very good pleadings, bring on record before the assessing officer or before the first appellate authority, and by this, then you can bring a fair amount of effectiveness and efficaciousness in your representational skills. So thank you once again, Bhutra Sahab and Shailendra ji and other office bearers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, questions which will take. Yes, sir. There are certain questions here. Amrit sir, can you take up the questions? My voice itself is echoing here.
Yeah, from chat box, no? From chat box. One minute.
Rakesh, unmute yourself.
Rakesh, can you bring madam also onto the screen?
Just
Actually, madam is not able to join due to some reasons.
Huh?
She's not able to join.
Okay.
No problem, Rakesh Gupta sir will take.
Okay. So I'll skip the madam's question.
No. Okay. Okay.
This question is asked by CAK Surya Narayana. Notice received, evidence given in detail, but AO not satisfied being insufficient or not proper, and make assessment based on section 144 without justification. Does the SSC has any remedy?
Who has to reply?
You have to reply, sir.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was thinking this question was going to madam. Again, would you kindly repeat it because?
अच्छा.
राकेश जी, अभी हमारे समस्या का समाधान आपको ही करना है अभी.
I will do because I was thinking that it's for her.
Okay. Once again, I'll repeat the question, sir.
Yes.
Ritesh, can you mute all the participants? It's giving some noise. Notice received, evidence given in detail, but AO not satisfied being insufficient or not proper, and make assessment based on the section 144 without justification. Does the SSC have any remedy?
Is by your first appeal. Remedy is by your first appeal because because assessing officer is a quasi-judicial officer. He has to be fair, judicious, conscientious, reasonable, objective. And in case he is not, then obviously that is not the end of the road. That is not the end of the road. And therefore, we have got right of appeal. The commissioner appeal will hear. And if commissioner appeal also turns his deaf ears, then you have got the tribunal. And I can say, with whatever experience I do have, that it is a wonderful institution, by and large fair and objective. You are heard, and if there is a justice, I can say with pride, if there is a justice in this country, it is at that institution.
Sir, this question is asked by the Virender. Sir, in case we do not ask to provide the adverse material, whether the same can be used against the taxpayer.
Of course. Now, you do not ask. That means that you are contents of adverse material to you, or which is so for you. If you are not vigilant enough to protect your interest, then the law will not come to you. The law will be taken when you yourself are taking care of you. So if there was adverse material, it was indicated by the assessing officer in his notice, you don't ask for it, and then you want to cry it before the first appellate authority, you have not been supplied. Obviously, the first appellate authority, okay, where is the request first of all? So, though first appellate authority is also an authority which has been given the power his powers are coterminous with that assessing officer. He may extend you the benefit of those evidence material, but then you must be vigilant enough to take care of your own interest.
Thank you, sir. The question is asked by the senior Bandaru. We produced the documents to the AO. They did not call them and cross-examine. Opportunity was not afforded. Can we produce them in appeal and arrange for the sworn-in statement? Is there any provision to request the CIT appeals to charge tax at normal rates instead of resorting to 115 VBE?
No, first of all, before you make a request to Commissioner Appeal not to sustain 150, now you will have to first of all displace that head in which that income has come to be assessed. That is income under that undisclosed source under section 68, 69 A, B, C, D. So you must make out a case that this is not an income of undisclosed source. These sections are not the appropriate sections under which this addition was to be made. Addition, first of all, should not or ought not to have been made. But if at all, it has to be made, it has to be made under some specific head of income. And therefore, you can make a request to, depending upon case, you asked a question in abstract form, therefore I again reply, in that abstract form only.
It is again how summoning will take place in faceless assessment.
Summoning if a witness is material, either for the assessing officer to produce it before you when you demand cross-examination, or for you to produce if in case you want a witness to be adduced and produced in your support. Obviously, there must be some mechanism. You make a request. Now, no request. Kindly see, on the Delhi High Court has issued notice to the Union of India on this faceless scheme only on the ground that how can there be any judicial or quasi-judicial process in which the hearing, can be dispensed with, or the opportunity of personal hearing can be dispensed with. So there cannot be any law even of this faceless scheme which has been made. You make a request, no power on this earth. Making this request, and it will be bounden duty of the judicial authorities to produce. So you don't worry. You must do your work, and rest thereafter our constitutional courts will take care of.
This is from this is regarding the Evidence Act, but the basic question is that Evidence Act is not strictly applicable to the income tax proceedings.
Strict rules of Indian Evidence Act may not be applicable, but then after all, a particular issue has to be decided based on evidence. A strict rule of evidence evidence under the Indian Evidence Act may not be required. That why this document is not notarized or authorized or stamped. All those strict rules of Indian Evidence Act are not applied. But then if you want to say that Evidence Act, even the general concepts of the Evidence Acts are not applicable, I feel sorry for it.
This is again by Rakesh Gupta. In faceless assessment in respect of matter of fact, proper and sufficient evidence can be produced, and since it is fact-based, convincing may be reasonably explained. But in case of matter of law, it would be difficult to represent maybe in 2,000 or 3,000 words, and number of words. May be difficult as it may require considerable level of arguments is required. What is your view?
No, you. Now, though on practical side, I am yet to undergo that kind of a process, but then there cannot be any system better than you file. Then who can prevent you, and why should one complain? In 3,000, that cannot be possible, Mr. Suryanarayana.
Sir, again by Suryanarayana only, how many number of times correspondence will be done from notice given to final AO in faceless assessment? Means how many times he can represent before the AO?
Mr. Suryanarayan has hijacked and monopolized the questions. Anyway, what was the question? Please read this. Please repeat.
Yeah. How many times the correspondence can be done with the AO before finalizing the order? This is the question.
There is no number limits. They will keep on asking, and you have to keep on giving answers. Now you cannot be heard saying, "Oh, I mean, assessing officers of the battery of assessing officer different units. I mean, they are overindulgent or very highly proactive. They have flashed 10 questionnaire or 12 questionnaire." Now this is the prerogative, the judicial function. I mean, you cannot be heard complaining on this point.
I have done, sir. That other question is also by Suryanarayan, but it is a practical. It's nothing to do with this thing because he is asking how to face the camera and the voice. So it's not.
Okay. This is a chairman's prerogative.
राकेश जी, can I ask a very small question, sir?
हाँ सर, कपूर सर बताएं, सर रितेश जी बताएं सर.
Sir, one more question. CIT will review. Will a CIT review the order of the another CIT? Please comment.
No, I mean, ultimately this assessment order will be the assessment order passed by an assessing officer. And though the possibility of 263, I mean, will be quite minimized because of several layers of assessing officers checking each other's, I mean, work. But then ultimately at the end of the day, this will be an assessment order passed under section 143(3) by an assessing officer, by an officer who is below in rank than the commissioner. And still if there is some error, I mean, which is found by interest of the revenue or prejudicial to the interest of revenue, then of course the 263 remedy is there. And kindly mind it now, this power has gone to commissioner by this amendment, latest amendment act 263 now has gone to chief commissioner.
Okay. Now,
So one of our past president Ramurthy has thanked you, sir, for your lucid presentation. With this, the questions are over, and over to Ritesh.
before Rakesh sir, can I ask you a question?
Can I ask one supplementary question further?
Yes, sir. Your voice is.
Can I ask one supplementary question?
Rakesh ji, a question, sir, regarding this appraisal report. It is a piece of important evidentiary value in such assessment. Why it can't be furnished to the assessee?
Piece of evidence. It is internal. It is their internal document. Now that cannot be pressed as an evidence. And in case if that is pressed as an evidence by the assessing officer, then he will be duty bound to part with. I mean, then he is duty bound to give it to you. Appraisal report is not a piece of it. This is their internal working. Like, I mean, it is not a piece of evidence. Anyway, if assessing officer chooses to rely upon, then he is duty bound to give it to you.
That is what, sir, I am. It is okay. Once it is given to assessing officers in central circle, and assessing officer based on that asks something to the assessee, so assessee demands a copy of that, can he get it?
What assessing officers do, they do not make reference to the appraisal report. They borrow something from the appraisal report as if this is their own. And in that case, I mean, then you would not be in a position to demand the copy of appraisal report. Okay. So.
But on the basis of appraisal report, we can prove that 153C should have been taken.
No, if you come across, I mean, some document illegally in your possession, then it's all right. If you can press that illegally garnered evidence, but then if there are other consequences that you have come in possession of some confidential document, I mean that I am not aware on what kind of consequences can be there. But of course, any evidence, even if it comes into your possession illegally, I mean, can be pressed into service by you. Appraisal report to be had by the SSE, I mean, is something to gain access to something which was not open to him, and therefore it is fraught with seriousness. That much I can suggest obliquely. Yes.
On the basis of appraisal report, assessee can prove that instead of normal assessment, 153C should have been taken. Therefore, possession of providing appraisal report by AO to assessee is essential.
Borrow your this kind of justification. Now, how can you say that 153C ought to have been done and not the normal assessment? Though I'm quite conscious that there are certain decisions which do say, but then on first principles of law, now nobody can be heard saying if the normal assessment could have been done within the normal provisions of the Act, and then to say no, 153C ought to have been done. Now, on first principles of law. Though I am aware about those decisions, Arun Kumar Kapoor from Amritsar Bank, that in this case instead of 148, 153 have been done. I beg to differ, because I always try to speak on the first principles of law. I may not agree with that proposition, and I am not agreeable to this proposition of yours with utmost respect and humility, that since you want to prove with the help of the appraisal report that 153 was the more appropriate normal assessment, and therefore you should be given. You are putting the cart before the horse. I understand if you have come into possession of the appraisal report and you want to use that appraisal report for the purpose of your argument, it is all right. But then to say that you want to prove something from the appraisal report, which is not in your possession, now, it is there, not there. It is just here.
Now, Ritesh.
Yes, sir. First of all, sir, thank you so much, Rakesh Gupta ji, for taking all the issues and taking the subject very explicitly, sir. And I request Sri Ramdevji Butra for the closing remarks. In fact, in the opening remarks also his voice went off. So I hope in the closing remarks he can close the comments with. Over to Ramdevji Butra.
Thank you, Ritesh. I don't find any words to express my gratitude for such a beautiful presentation by both the speakers, particularly Rakesh Gupta. Sir, you have excelled in all the fields, right from assessing officer till appellate. Lot of good information all of us who have participated have got from it. But one thing I couldn't digest, sir. The time allotted to you was very short. So it was not enough. So if you keep your blessings on us, we will have another session subsequently with your permission. So with that expectation, I thank you very much, sir. I thank Madam has got some urgent work she has got. That's why she has left.
Sir, one thing you said in the beginning. Why did I leave tribunal? So, sir, though I may have left a tribunal, but I have given my wife to the tribunal as a member. So I have tried to make up. So
मेरा सिर्फ इतना निवेदन था सर, इतनी जल्दी क्यों? सर आपका सुनके बहुत रियली we are delighted very much.
Thank you, sir.
Very effective way. One who can understand these pleading proceedings, at least some basic, can grow a lot. That is what I expect. Because the present practice of faceless is based totally on that only. It is my opinion, sir. And I hope you will continue to shower your blessings in future also by taking up another session. I am expecting after January or so. And your guidance is also very much needed in our moot court competition, which we have planned to organize in December last week or January. At that time also, we'll trouble you, sir, a little bit for your help and guidance.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
With these words, I again hand over to Rakesh for formal vote of thanks proceeding.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Sri Amrit Kumar Kota for a formal vote of thanks.
Yeah. Sir, this is a special assignment given to me to close, to give the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Muthu Abirami madam. She is really fantastic, and by seeing her age, I thought she will give only to certain extent of the knowledge, but she spoke almost like a matured professional. And then Rakesh Gupta, we need not gauge, we cannot gauge his intellectuality, because I happen to be the student of the first batch of drafting of appeals and tribunals. I have seen him in that course, and the way of his notes presentation is really helpful in our profession and a practicing profession. So if we can provide that material to the tax bar, it will be useful for the members, sir. So yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And no, we got some case laws and all as a notes.
Prepare notes, sir. I don't prepare notes.
No, but we got some notes now. Your case laws and all.
Okay, then kindly give it to me also, sir.
Yeah. And last but not the least, I thank all the participants who have patiently listened and enriched themselves for their knowledge. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, sir.
On behalf of Tax Bar, I convey Happy Dashara, Happy Deepavali and Navratri to all the delegates participated, particularly to Rakesh Gupta ji, sir. दीपावली की बहुत बहुत बधाई, और
आपको भी सर बहुत बहुत बधाई.
आपको फिर पर्सनल विश करेंगे. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
So much, sir.
So much, Rakesh ji. Bye.
I'm ending this meeting here.
सुरेश साहब को बोल दो मीटिंग हो गया बोल के.